Washington has found its next defensive coordinator.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen today. Just a reminder to all you everydayers out there, make sure to hit that subscribe button wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, wherever it might be, as it does really help us out and keeps you up to date with all the latest breaking Husky news. We love to make sure we pump out bonus episodes throughout the offseason, all that sort of stuff. So subscribe, leave a like, comment down below if you have any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that. Because Lars, we got so much fun stuff coming throughout the offseason, and it starts right now. Because Washington, they're finalizing their deal with Ryan Walters. We're going to get there in a minute. We're also going to compare Ryan Walters to Steve Belichick, the last two Husky defensive coordinators. We're also going to jump into Tacario Davis a little bit later on, some more transfer portal stuff along those lines. But we got to start with this hire because Ryan Walters was not a great head coach at Purdue, but he was a fantastic defensive coordinator during his time in Illinois. And we talked about it the other day. This really is a slam dunk hire for Washington.
Yeah, not everybody is Marcus Freeman. And I think actually when Marcus, I don't know if it was coincidence. I know when Marcus got the job, Jimmy Lake also got the job at Washington. Both very good in their own right defensive minds. Just some guys for various reasons. And again, I'm not saying Ryan Walters is Jimmy Lake or Marcus Freeman. Right? I'm just saying like good defensive minds, not always built to be the best head coach. And I think also was kind of going into a tough situation there at Purdue where it's not necessarily a school that you think, instantly you jump off the top and think, wow, great resources, all those sorts of things. And also coming from a school like Illinois, it was Illinois where he's coming from.
Yep.
It's like, 2 really good years as a DC, but it wasn't like, you're coming as like, 5, 6, like Kirby Smart going to Georgia where it's like, look, guy was waiting for the right job. And I'm sure he learned a lot of things. And when we get to talk to him, when he's introduced to Washington, I'm sure we'll ask him. But he also produced Devon Witherspoon, who's now with the Seattle Seahawks, just absolutely killing it in the league. And he's at a number of other guys. So you look at the hire in totality and think, from a recruiting standpoint, knows how to get guys. We've seen that with him in the portal, getting guys from the SEC. And, I'm not saying, bona fide 5-stars, but kind of almost like in the Jonte Cook mold where it's, hey, you were a borderline 5-star at your old school or were a 5-star in Jonte's case, but you didn't necessarily crack through. Here, you know what, let me make you right here. And Washington, similar in a way to Purdue, where it's like, look, you might not be the Georgias, the Alabamas, the Oregons, and you're going to win those high school recruiting battles. But you can still prove that you develop talent year in and year out, which is what Ryan Walters has done basically everywhere he's been.
So I agree with you there. One quick thing that we should certainly note off the top, you mentioned whenever we do get a chance to talk to him, this deal has not been announced. It was first reported by 247 Sports' Matt Zenitz that it's, final. It's in the stages of being finalized, all that sort of stuff. But because Steve Belichick is still coaching, is still the defensive coordinator, still under contract and will be until after the bowl game, we expect, these hires to be just announced and all that sort of stuff toward the end of the week, maybe into next week, whenever that might be. So if you don't hear anything right away, that's why. Don't be surprised by that. But yeah, I like everything that you said there. And these are all things we talked about the other day. So if you want a little bit more in depth on what he brings to the table, we talked about that on our Friday show, but I wanted to rehash a couple of those things. You talked about the recruiting aspect of it all and the development. I love where you're going with that. When I look at this from a recruiting standpoint, it's something that he did do a really good job, especially in that first year that he had at Purdue, getting some good talent in the building. We saw him do that at Illinois as well. He was a good recruiter. Same thing at Mizzou, where you look at his path and you say, yeah, this is a guy who's absolutely able to recruit. He's able to bring in talent. But more importantly than that, as you mentioned with Devon Witherspoon, he's able to develop that talent. And that's something where you look at Washington, you look at some of the talent they were able to bring in this 2025 class, whether it is Zaja Sereni-Saleh, Dylan Robinson, Donovan Robinson, another guy we really like on defense, Dominic McCone, just to kind of get somebody from every level there. But I look at all these guys and I say, this scheme is going to be really helpful. I'm going to get into that a little bit more later on, but the coaching that he's able to provide along with the rest of the staff is just so helpful. And we've seen it year in and year out. And if you want to look at his head coaching record at Purdue and say, I'm not too sure about this guy. I think that's fair, but I don't think that that's really what is going to define him at the end of the day, because we've seen guys be, so-so or not great as a head coach, but still thrive in a coordinator role.
Yeah, well, and also look at the numbers that he put up at Purdue, because I was about to, when I, did that story as you similarly did on the Huskies, where it's okay, deal is probably going to be finalized here in the next couple of days. We get to know him. It's like, ooh, his defense was like bottom of the Big Ten at Purdue the past couple of years, and it's like, okay, how much of that is again indicative. And that's why I was saying, Purdue not necessarily going to be the most attractive. It's kind of the Vanderbilt, if you will, of the Big Ten, where you might win 3, 4, or 5, potentially 6 games, maybe in a good year, 8, 9, but that's every 4 or 5 years. So it's not going to be one of those programs that necessarily threatens you all the time. But I think again, that's why you look at the whole resume, what he's done, even, going back to his days at Arizona, North Texas, where similar in a way to John Richardson, where everywhere he's been able to produce, except for when he was a head coach. And I think you just kind of say, you know what? You were a rising star. Maybe you kind of flashed a little too soon. Now here's a solid landing spot, because it's almost what Jim Harbaugh did when he was in Michigan, where it's whether it's Mike McDonald, Jesse Minter, whoever you want to put in that DC role. This is what I'm looking for philosophically in my defensive coordinator. Whoever I specifically hire in their exact scheme, as you mentioned, we'll get into later, that can kind of vary a little bit, but again, you're not going to go from a 3-4 to a 4-3 every other year. You're not doing those sort of changes. And I think that's clearly when you look at Steve Belichick and Ryan Walters, they're both under 40, right? I think Steve Belichick is in his late 30s, if I'm not mistaken. I think they're actually both 38, if I'm not totally mistaken. But you look at it and think, okay, good. He's not going and getting, no offense, like a Dwayne Akeen and saying, hey, let me go get the band back together and give him a promotion, or do those sorts of maybe Steve Sarkisian-esque things where it's like, okay, we're hiring from the friend tree, or are we using the resources that you came to Washington for and saying, hey, you know what, if I'm Ryan Walters, let me kind of rehab, my image and have maybe a top 25 defense back-to-back years in Washington. And if I get another head coaching job, so be it. Or I guess if, Kirby comes calling at Georgia or whatever, then those are good problems for Jedd to have, because well, again, I got a top 25 defense back-to-back years out of it, which probably means an 8+ win season.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned the going away from just the Bill Belichickian mold of I know these people and these are the people that I'm going to trust, or I'm going to refer to them to for all my assistance moving forward. We're moving outside of that mold, getting an established power, like truly power 2, but power 4 head coach, and established in terms of he has the experience. And he's been around the SEC. He's been around the Big Ten. He understands what that defense looks like, or just what it takes to succeed, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And you can look at what he's put in the NFL, because it's not, just Devon Witherspoon. I love to reference Johnny Newton as another guy, which is why I brought up Dominic McCone a few minutes ago, because that's another guy who thrived in that defensive scheme. And it wasn't just the ability to go out there and develop him. It was to recruit him and to identify that talent, which is such a big part of this. And that's one thing that I want to get into in a minute, because one of the biggest differences for me between hiring Ryan Walters and having Steve Belichick is the knowledge of the high school level and what it takes to recruit and do these things. And it's not, I don't want to say it's a knock one way or the other, but that's something we'll get into on the other side of the break. Because we've got a message from our friends over at Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitor your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all the app's premium features. For me, one of the best features is the subscription tracker. I've used it to cancel services I wasn't using anymore, and I've already saved a ton. Plus, with their goals feature, I've been able to automatically set aside money for my future. No more stress about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. One more time, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. So Lars, this is one of the interesting things for me when it comes to the Jedd Fisch mantra of, hey, I want to make this a pro style program. I want to hire from the NFL. I want to bring in big names. I want to do this. I want to do that. That's all well and good. And as you and I both were, we were very big fans of the Steve Belichick hire. We thought that was phenomenal. I'm still a fan of the way it worked out. It's unfortunate the personnel wasn't in a little bit better spot, especially a defensive tackle, for the scheme to truly thrive the way that I feel that it could have. But I want to get into the scheme in a few minutes because I think that they're a lot more similar than some people might give it credit for. But when I look at this in terms of what Ryan Walters brings to the table, that's why I wanted to finish off that part of the conversation with Johnny Netwon and Devon Witherspoon and identifying talent, because it's very important in this day and age to have some of those connections to different high schools around the country where it's, oh, hey, maybe this guy's a little bit underrated. I like to think of the Parker brothers in that sense of getting Armand and Javon Parker when they were, under recruited, not really realized talents, and look at what Javon turned into. It's unfortunate that he got hurt. That's a different discussion for a different day with what he might look like this next season. But I look at this and I say Ryan Walters is the perfect guy to go out there, and he's already got some of those relationships established around the country. He's spent enough time in the SEC and in the Big Ten to not just, he is a West Coast guy originally, but to not just have those West Coast relationships, but to have them all over the country, which I think is an important part of this. And, it's something that Steve Belichick, after spending all 12 years he had coaching in the NFL, he just didn't. And it's not a knock on him, but that's something where if you need to go find talent, Ryan Walters is a guy who is going to be a little bit more involved in that than Steve Belichick was.
Absolutely. Well, and I think the intriguing part, as I'm diving more deep, literally live as we're doing this here, one thing that intrigues me about Ryan Walters' hire as I kind of look more into it, compared to the Steve Belichick, we saw a lot of rotation this year. Part of that was due to the youth that you had, and you had to kind of work some guys in. And as a byproduct, Kamori House emerged, and now I know it's this kind of bittersweet name there because now he's going to do his thing at UNC. But you saw what the potential next wave could be, and the thought of Dylan Robinson and Donovan Robinson and Zadrius and all these guys and Jonathan Epperson coming in right away and saying, hey, you know what? How quickly can these guys break into the two deeps and into the rotation? Looking at the PFF snap counts, though, from his time at Illinois, just kind of going back to where his roots really truly started, each year you kind of saw, so 2021, they had about 5 edges play more than 10-plus games and get significant snaps and things like that. But the previous year was the following year was only 2. So in 22 it was only 2. But the defensive line had 5 and 6 respectively in those 2 years. So for me, it seems like there's not a ton of rotation in his defense, which I'm kind of curious to see. Maybe is that something that he kind of evolves a little bit, knowing how much young talent is going to be at Washington, even though, yes, you got some nice safeties in the portal and things like that. You're not just going to roll the same 2 guys for 700-plus snaps, and the only other 2 guys are going to get 150. But looking at the numbers, that's what it was at Illinois. So I'm curious to see kind of how much is Ryan Walters, and I think maybe kind of that time at Purdue, how much did that humble you? Say, hey, I don't next 6 years.
I don't think that's what it is though. Where if you look at especially that time at Illinois, one of the it's why I keep bringing this name up. One of those most important pieces was Johnny Netwon. If you have an interior game wrecker like that, it's the best comparison I can make for this last year of college football. It's like saying, oh yeah, we love Mason Graham. We have Mason Graham, but we're going to give him 250 snaps. Like that's one of those guys that you put out there for as much as you possibly can. Obviously he's not going to play every snap and he's still going to be part of a rotation, but you want to lean on somebody like that as heavily as you possibly can. But I'm glad you mentioned that because I think the way that this defense is structured, it's very important to see that rotation. And I think that's something he's learned in terms of, we saw the talent play out in terms of, top 10 against the run and the pass, overall number 1 in scoring, number 3 in total defense, whatever. So that's all well and good from his time at Illinois. But on top of that, this defense is structured in a way where I don't know if it's going to be top 10 necessarily. I'd love to see him unlock it and get it to that level, but it's structured in a way where there isn't a Johnny Netwon as of right now. There isn't a Devon Witherspoon as of right now. There's some great talent on this team for sure, but you have to look at it and you have to say, all right, when I look at especially this pass rush, especially what it could be, you and I have talked ad nauseum about Zach Durfee emerging, about Isaiah Ward, who looked really good this past season. We saw what Russell Davis did when he was healthy. You look at it and you say, all right, there is this collection of guys, and maybe at Illinois, it wasn't that same depth of talent. We've seen them obviously take a big step back defensively. They're still a good team for sure. I don't want that to get twisted, but they've certainly taken a step back in that regard since he left. So I look at that and I say, I look at this front four, and honestly, it might even be a front five at times when you look at the way that he runs his defense, and you're going to see some bigger fronts. That's one of the bigger differences, where I wouldn't be surprised if we see way more fronts with 3 defensive tackles, which would be really nice against the run. But I look at that and I say, I trust where he wants to bring this defense, because it's something you and I talked about a couple weeks ago when these rumors about Bill Belichick started happening. It's, hey, there's no way that these guys are just committing here blind without knowing who's going to come in as the defensive coordinator. And it's something where you look at some of these fronts and you say, okay, I can absolutely see Linus Davis, Simone Peppa, and Tacario Thompson being the 3 guys out there at one time, where it's not just the skill sets that play off each other really well. It's Ryan Walters understands how to get these guys in positions to succeed, because we've seen him do that before.
Yeah, well, and I think in almost morphing the two together, I think he's going to look at the talent that he's going to inherit at Washington and say, well, you know what? Now that I have these guys in the front, I can do run these type of sets where maybe I didn't have the personnel at Illinois or Purdue, because again, similar to as I was looking at the Purdue numbers in 23 and 24, there's still not a ton of rotation. But I wonder, it's like, well, maybe he sees, hey, you know what? I can't not play these freshmen, and so maybe if everybody gets 150 to 200 snaps, and you just kind of let the cream rise to the top throughout the season, I think that might be his go-to plan, because you're looking and say you're not going to just have Logan Tagapalu play another 5 to 7 reps, snaps a game, because it's like, okay, in year one, you can kind of look and say, hey, you know what? In hindsight, he is making the transition back to defense from offensive line. So it's a little bit of a big ask to say, now all of a sudden year one, jump right into it. But it's like we said with MJ, okay, year two, now we kind of have some expectations here. But my point is, with that size, you gotta use that size.
Oh, 100%.
If he's 6'1", 275, I don't care. The fact that he's 345 right on a good day.
No, you're right. But it's not that. It's not that. It's, we saw what that looked like with a similar personnel group this past season. We saw what it looked like when you didn't have a deeper rotation of bodies along the defensive line. That's why they've already brought in 2 defensive tackles. That's why they're probably going to bring in 1 more through the transfer portal. That's what it is. We've seen that could not work because the bodies straight up were not there. And you look at that room right now, let's say you do add in 1 more guy. And I'm going to exclude the true freshmen from this conversation because I don't think they're going to play in 2025. But you've got Omar Khan, you've got Bryce Butler, Linus Davis, you have the 2 transfers that we just mentioned, you have Logan Sagapolo, you've got the Parker brothers if they're healthy. That's a much deeper rotation than you had at any point last season. Much deeper. Where you're looking at it at its best last year and you were 6 guys deep. You have the opportunity to play way more guys this year, and you're still taking some risks for sure. And Tacario Thompson was playing at Western Michigan last season, and Simone Peppa was injured for part of 2024. Like, you're still taking risks. And again, that's without including the Parker brothers and everything. But you look at the defensive front and it's going to have to be a deeper rotation. You need that because you need that to succeed in the Big Ten. Or you need a true game wrecker, which again, right now, this team does not have. So, and I look at that and I think Johnny Netwon, who at one point was projected to be a top 20 pick and still went in the top 40. So I look at that and I say, if you are able to figure out this defensive front, I think the bodies are there to do it, but you straight up cannot, you cannot put anybody out there for more than 500-600 snaps. If somebody, let's say Linus Davis, we think he might have the highest ceiling in the room at this point in time, outside of Javon Parker. But if Linus Davis comes in and shows you, hey, I can absolutely be a game wrecker. I can get 40, let's just say 40 pressures from the interior. Like, oh yeah, 100%. You're going to be out there as much as possible. That's fine. We're not going to rotate you. But at this point, you don't have that, and you need to find a way to make it work. And I'm just curious to see how that's going to play out on the interior, because on the edge, I think it's going to work out fine. I like Jaden Wayne. I like Jacob Lane. I like the Arizona guys, Zach Durfee. The rotation is there on the edge, which is why we saw a couple guys leave that room. But on the interior, there's still a lot to figure out. And this is something that Steve Belichick didn't have, but it's also something that Ryan Walters just has a little bit more experience with.
Yeah, and I think, and it's almost like use this fresh start to say, okay, use the experience to maybe try some new things. And you have this, abundance of young talent here. You're gonna have to tap into it because in this day and age, Jedd's gonna make it very clear to Ryan Walters, if he didn't during the interview process, hey, look, you're interested in this job for a reason. There's a good, incoming transfer talent, yes, for Jerry Alexander, and the other guys that were kind of more veterans in that mix. But the young guys just as much. It's like, hey, you're going to have to play some of these guys. And I think it'll be interesting to see just kind of how Ryan Walters adapts to the situation, because it's like, look, you got the keys to a Cadillac. Just don't crash it.
And Lars, would be really helpful with that? Tacario Davis. So Lars, as we look at what this scheme could be under Ryan Walters, something I said a few minutes ago is you don't have that truly elite, guaranteed, bona fide first-round talent on this team right now. One guy who could absolutely do that if he decides to come to Washington is Tacario Davis. We've talked about him a couple of times. It still really feels like he's mulling Washington versus the NFL at this point in time. And he would be such a huge help to this defense, especially if Thaddeus Dixon decides to go to the NFL, that bringing a guy like him into this room would not only be a huge help to just the group as a whole, like, for example, Dylan Robinson, but it would be a massive help for Ryan Walters and his scheme.
Well, I think to me, it's all setting up as there's 3 dominoes lined up on the table right now. And one of them, whichever, pick one, because they can go in really any order, but I think it's going to be when Ryan Walters is formally announced, when the statement comes from UW, hey, after the bowl game, thank you, Steve, for your one season at Washington. Go join your father. Because again, that's how this is set up. Like, you can't announce Ryan Walters like, hey, after the bowl game, he'll be our official one. It's like, we currently have this guy. It's like, oh, by the way, he's leaving. And it's like, yeah, we can't. So you have to just wait till everything is done. So Ryan Walters will be announced. I think then at that point, then Jedd can look at Tacario with Ryan and formally announce, saying, hey, do you think you're ready for the NFL? And if you have any doubts, Devon Witherspoon's in Seattle. Hop in the car with Ryan Walters. We'll go over to the VMAC right now. We can have that conversation right now. That is an NFL sell that Jedd is trying to pull here. And by the way, if you want to worry about your GM stuff, got Mike Tannenbaum online too. So, there's all these sorts of things where if you're Tacario and it's like, okay, if you have any hesitation about, well, am I going to be Buda Baker where I'm the first pick on day 2? Or am I going to find myself into a, guaranteed first round slot? Option C is I could become Devon Witherspoon and become a top 10 pick and really become a lockdown, guaranteed bona fide top 10, top 15 guy. Whereas right now, okay, I could go 31, 32 maybe, but as we've seen, the Taylor Ratfall and a number of other guys. I mean, but Buda's not a first round pick. Look how well he's done in the NFL.
Sure.
Stay humble because not everybody's a first round pick.
Where, I'm glad you mentioned the Buda Baker mold where he went 36. Washington has had 2 corners go first pick of day 2, Kevin King, Byron Murphy, where that's something that's happened a lot over the past couple of years. But Tacario is a first round talent. Tacario very well could be the first corner off the board in any year that is not this one, because Will Johnson is a top 10 pick. And I say that with all due respect to Tacario. I think he is a fantastic talent. But Will Johnson, Ben Morrison, Travis Hunter, they're all going ahead of him, no matter how you feel about any of those prospects. That's the way it's going to be. And if you look at what Tacario was in 2023, that was an all-world prospect. Like, that's just how good that this guy is at that size, at 6'4", 200 pounds, whatever he is, with that length. He had 16 PBUs that year. All Pac-12 first team, led the conference. He did not look the same without John Richardson in that Brent Brennan scheme. None of it looked the same during his time at Arizona. So if he wants to go to the NFL and say, hey, I'm going to cut my losses, I'm still going to be a top 50 pick, I'm just going to say this right now in terms of anybody who's wondering about the NIL, what that might look like. Go do the math of the 50th pick in this past draft, which was Mikey Sanders, corner who went to the Washington Commanders. We know him very well from his time at Michigan, where go look at what that number was for his contract and say, all right, that's probably around what Tacario might expect. I'm just saying that as a hypothetical. Don't mean anything behind that. That's just the number that I would say he's probably going to get a top 50 grade for sure. But If he says, I think that number is fine, I'm willing to take a risk on that, more power to him. But you can also look at it from the other standpoint and say, if you're John Richardson, if you're this Jedd Fisch coaching staff, and say, hey, look at what we turned you into before that. Give us one more year to get you back to that point. And all of a sudden, Lars, you said it, top 10, top 15, boom. And it's one of those things where, are you going to take the money now and bet on yourself, which is great? Or are you going to say, I'm going to put my hands into Jedd Fisch's coaching staff, put my trust in their hands and let them work with me for one more year and go from there? It feels like that's the decision that he's mulling right now. And I'm curious because I don't think that there's a bad route here. Personally, from the standpoint of what we do and what we cover, it'd be awesome to get a chance to talk to him and see him up here at Washington. But that does not matter in the grand scheme of things. But I also look at what he could be in this Ryan Walters defense, as you said, and it's look at what Devon Witherspoon did, where I think that he might utilize Tacario a little bit differently because of what his skill set is. He's not going to have him run blitz. He's not as fast and physical and just overwhelming at the point of attack as Devon Witherspoon is. I really don't think there's any corner in the NFL that is, even Trent McDuffie, and I love the guy, but I look at what Tacario Davis brings to the table and what he could be in this scheme, which we didn't necessarily get as much of a chance to talk about in the last segment, but it is aggressive in the same way that Steve Belichick says. It is playing a lot of man coverage in one-on-one out on an island, which is where he's at his best, which is where he thrives. And I think that I look at that and say, one more year of that kind of tape on your resume, and you're going in the top 15 like you want.
So in a way, it's almost like Tacario has a chance to do, because aside from Kyler Gordon, can you name the last Washington cornerback that got drafted and, make his mark in the NFL, shall we say? Like, going back to the death row days. Right?
Are you going to make me say Trent McDuffie? Actually, wait, no, I do have the name, and it's Elijah Molden, because Elijah 2021, unfortunate that he broke his leg, by the way. That really sucked to see.
No, absolutely. But what I was going to say, it's Trent and it's Byron. Because no slight to Elijah, but I'm saying like top, day 1, day 2 pick.
Elijah was a day 2 pick.
Oh, right. No, but I'm saying first, second round. Like those, because Elijah was I think third or fourth.
He was a third round pick.
Well, again, I advocated that day. Was hey, we're going to look back and say this is criminally, underrated that you had to go off the board this long. So again, that's not to slight Elijah. My point is, Tacario could almost in a way the new wave, if you will, of DBU. We're going to re-inject that Marcus Peters energy. And I'm not saying he's Marcus Peters-esque in terms of how his Washington career ended. I'm not making any slight to that. What I'm just saying is, like, you haven't really, Washington hasn't produced a DB, annually in X number of years. Is my point of what I'm driving at here. And you can look at, Elijah was kind of the only holdover because, dude probably should have gone 2 years earlier. And, you look at everybody else in that class where, guys ended up being fine college players, but nobody ended up going to play on Sundays. And that's what DBU at Washington used to be all about. Tacario is going to be that guy. Why not be that Devon Witherspoon, if you will, and say, let me finish. And he also strikes me as a guy where I haven't had a chance to talk to him, but he just strikes me as a guy where, like, let's finish what I started. Kind of like Jonah, where it's like, look, I'm going to follow Scotty to Washington because he was the guy that believed in me and things like that. And Tacario was a part of that 22 class. So it wasn't like he was inherited from the last staff and then John Richardson coached him up, like Thaddeus Dixon, for example. You were a part of that initial wave. Let's finish what we started. And by the way, if you're Washington from the NIL perspective, is it worth the investment? Well, again, they don't have war in college football, but again, you're probably talking about a 1 or 2 win difference there. So if you're in that 7, 8, 8, 9, and Tacario gets you to 8, 9, 10, like that's what you're talking about. That's again why Jedd came for the resources. That's why. And again, I know it's frustrating. People say, "Wow, we got to paying a DC 1 point whatever, and paying a coach 7 point whatever, and now we got to pay 1.2 for a cornerback." It's like, again, do you want to make the playoffs or not? Because again, if we're talking about 10-2 and you're in the playoffs next year, pulling in Indiana, anybody cares about having these conversations right now?
I have the perfect example for you when it comes to what you're going to see next season and where it's very, very helpful to have Tacario Davis on your team. When the Ohio State Buckeyes come to town on September 27th and you're thinking, oh man, how is the secondary going to cover Jeremiah Smith? You have an answer. And you'd say, all right, yeah, I don't care if he's able to do his job on that day. And that's exactly that plays into the last thing I wanted to make sure that I got out there. It's the exposure of playing one more season in the Big Ten. And it's the exposure, because I love everything you said about, finishing what you started, the 22 class that Jedd has talked ad nauseum about being so important to what he did at Arizona. Why not try to bring in, as many of those guys as you possibly can? We've seen it with Taitai Uyunglele. We've seen it with Jacob Manu. We saw Ephesians Prysock, Jonah Coleman. We've seen those guys already follow him up here to be part of that. And Tacario is kind of that last missing piece where it's, let's say that right now we say they're 8-4 and 9-3. You're right. Tacario is that guy who can, be that lockdown corner on 3rd and 4 when you need to get a stop and they're going to want to throw the ball that way. That's the kind of guy that he's going to be. And we love Thaddeus Dixon. We love Ephesians Prysock. They're very talented corners, but they're not on the level of where Tacario is right now. And mainly it's because of his elite size and elite athleticism.
Exactly. And the other side of that is now how much does that help Ephesians Prysock? How much do, almost in a way, think about the Legion of Boom. Like you're talking about CJ Christian, Alex McLaughlin, you throw McKellen there for good measure. You're talking about a long, athletic, rangy, talented secondary. And then you figure out the front 7 from there, however it looks, whether it's 4 down, 5 down, whatever you want to call it. But that's also a strength of Ryan Walters' defense, is having a strong secondary, having that sort of LOB secondary from the Seahawks used to do back in the day. And I'm not saying Belichick didn't have that, but again, it's like you work with what you had. You had a pretty good defense here. But man, if you can add Ryan Walters with this talent and you add Tacario as the cherry on top, it's like that's what you came to Washington for, Jedd. That's why you came to and that's why, if you're Washington, it's why you went to the Big Ten. You could be chilling in the Pac-12 or the, not the Big 12, because let's be real, that move never really made sense. But just, some rendition of, the old guard. And it's like, no, you came to the big leagues. It's time to step it up.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank all everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.